Hello, welcome to There'll Always Be Another Book. As you might be able to tell by the changing backdrop, I have touched back home in the motherland, which means I have access to more books and consequently more book reviews that I'll be able to do, especially some of the books that I read in the past that I really wanted to talk about, but I didn't have access to them while I was overseas. And so to celebrate coming back and having access to these books, I thought I would do a review on a book that you've probably never heard of, but was an absolute highlight read for me in 2021, Forces in Motion, Anthony Braxton and the Meta-Reality of Creative Music. Needless to say, this book is a five-star book. If there could be 6 stars, there would be for this book. But I'm going to jump into it just because, like I said, you've probably not heard of this book, Anthony Braxton, unless you happen to be a fan not only of jazz saxophone, but of avant-garde jazz saxophone from the 70s, 80s and beyond. But I really mean it when I say this was a highlight book for me. And there's a lot of things that I want to talk about, but just some background on the book. It was written in 1985 by a man named Graham Locke, and he's a music critic journalist who basically talked to Anthony Braxton and was like, hey, you've got a 2-week tour coming up. Can I, tag along and just interview you and write a book? And Braxton was like, yeah, come on, let's do it. And so the whole book is pretty much structured. The chapters alternate between road and meta road. And the road is just literally dates, Tuesday 12 in London, Wednesday 13 London, Wednesday 26th Coventry, blah, blah, blah. And those are the days. And in those chapters, there will still be interviews, but Locke spends some time talking about the venue that they're playing, the compositions that they're playing, etc., etc. Anthony Braxton's quartet. But really the meat of the book is the alternating chapters, which are meta road. So during the road sections, Braxton might mention an idea or a topic, and in the meta road, they will elaborate on it. And I think these are interviews from different times, or like a little bit later, yeah, because I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, Locke met Braxton in person for the first time on this 2-week tour. But to talk about why I find the book so special is that I don't want this to sound hyperbolic, but I really mean it when I say that Anthony Braxton is one of my favorite people who's ever lived. This book impressed upon me just the absolute titanic nature of his genius. And if I was to try and sum him up in one word or sentence, I would say that it seems that early in his life, Anthony Braxton just decided that all knowledge is true. And the consequence of that is that in his hundreds, boundless compositions, he seems to just draw inspiration from everything and anything. And just to give some context, around the time that this 2-week tour in 1985 takes place, Braxton just finished writing these, his 3-volume triaxiom writings, which are, I have the second and also the third one, but no third hands, so you'll just have to imagine it, which is 500 pages each of philosophical musings, questionings, ponderings, talking about the way that he sees the universe. Just to give you a little sneak peek, he has these diagrams here, and you have no idea how to decipher them until you go to the start of the book, where he has this index of all of these terms and what they mean. So just to give an example, ISTF is isolated focus, JRDYM is journalism dynamics, POLCON is political consciousness. There's also postulation, race, restructuralism, relevant application, related procedure. a bunch of stuff that I have no idea what any of this means, because Braxton is just an absolute loose unit, and what he writes about is just so on another transcendental level that it's really crazy. I mean, I've skimmed through the book just to try and get an idea, but one of the things I did want to just read is page 176, level 3. He answers a bunch of interesting questions. I'll just read the title, and if they sound interesting, just know that in these triaxiom writings, he gives his opinions on them. So, what is your opinion on the significance of black creativity and its encounter with Western culture? Historians would have us believe that the solidification of black creativity and its resultant aesthetic was accidental. Do you agree? Is there a tradition of improvisation in Western art music? Have you implied that white people have no right to utilize and participate in black creativity? Which is an interesting one. Why do you not accept the idea of innovation in creative music? What problems does the white musician encounter by participating in creative music from the black aesthetic? Lots of really interesting deep dive questions, and just for him to have written this, like, considering the events of his life. So, I mean, he was a struggling musician for a very, very long time. To give some context, I don't remember the year, but he got a record deal with Arista, where he was able to do 10 records with them, and I don't think he paid any of the musicians, or was able to pay any of the musicians, but he still went tens of thousands of dollars into debt because he needed to print the sheet music. And to give some context, one of the albums on the Arista record is a composition for 2 orchestras. And so there were 2 student orchestras on different sides of the room, and he printed off the score for all of them, and some of the scores had pictures, as you might see here. These are the names of some of his compositions, and you'll see in his compositions he has language music, which is something he's kind of come up with. That's, I mean, it was being experimented with before, but Braxton really buckled down and made a system of language music, which can be seen here. And a lot of these will appear in his scores. And the score was like over 300 pages long, and imagine printing that for 2 orchestras, where he was in debt for, him and his wife were in debt for like many years afterwards. Fortunately, in the last 15 or 20 years, Braxton actually became a MacArthur Fellow, which is very, very well deserved. And it's hard to get more into Braxton without going super deep, so I actually talked about him quite a lot in my undergrad thesis, so I can talk quite specifically about it. But for just as an attempt to kind of convince you to read this book, I'm going to skim through the contents and just read some of the interesting ideas. So the very first chapter, which should draw you in straight away, is called Astro-Black Mythology, where he talks about a lot of things. He talks about Sun Ra, Doors of the Cosmos, House of Light. In some other pieces, he talks about the AACM, which is the Advancement for the Association of Creative Musicians, which was started in 1961, if I remember correctly. He talks about, he has a section where he talks about some of his influences, so Paul Desmond, Charlie Parker, Eric Dolphy, Jackie McLean, Ornette Coleman, Vaughan Marsh. He also talks about Coltrane, Cecil Taylor. If any of these names are sounding familiar, you really owe it to yourself to hear Braxton's perspective. He talks about being in the industry as a black musician. He talks about feeling the ties of the black jazz community, or just the jazz community, but like the black tradition or creative aesthetic, criticizing him for having a lot of compositions and not swinging enough, but then he's experiencing the kind of typical racism of the 70s, 80s, and beyond from the white European perspective. So he's a guy that's just like torn right in the middle of it. Yeah, I don't know how much more I can go into without just talking specifically, but The book is very, very readable. It is, like I said, an interview and conversation. And another part of the book that I really liked is there are some interjections with the other members of the quartet where they talk about their life, their experience, but also their experience playing with Anthony Braxton, and just what that led to and the influence that he's made on them. Braxton, he seems to just be able to talk about anything, and he at least knows enough to ask questions and to get into the door about a lot of things. It's not even, like I said, he sort of seems to believe that all knowledge is true, which means that he doesn't have a particular religion, he doesn't have a particular spiritual aesthetic or outlook. He's just looking for knowledge and seeing what inspiration he can get from it. And that's why I can't stress enough, Braxton is one of my favorite humans to have ever lived. He's up there with Nabokov and Thelonious Monk, but this book is really, really required reading for anybody who's interested in jazz post 1970 and the kind of intellectual movement, especially the Black intellectual movement. It's a phenomenal piece of work. It's so amazing to see that Anthony Braxton is still alive, cooking and playing today, and still composing. He has over 300 compositions in his belt, and a lot of his compositions are like composition 23A, 23B, 23C, and all of these are full songs. So yeah, he's a fascinating individual. He's written pieces that are meant to be played on multiple planets at once. He's written, this is a piece for solo tuba, light show, and constructed environment. You know, whatever that means. And I had such a ball reading this book, and I need to read it again because Anthony Braxton is an absolute wealth of knowledge and should be cherished by all intellectual friends and colleagues around. Please give this a go if you haven't checked it out, if you haven't heard of it. If any of the names that I mentioned in this sound familiar, you'll be interested to hear. I think you would be interested to hear Braxton's perspective on it, because he's such a great mind and a towering titanic intellect. Thank you so much for watching this video. It's good to be back home. I have some more reviews planned, but for now, make sure you keep reading because there will always be another book, and I'll see you in the next video.